Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9, amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org.
This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Five Wives Vodka, Market Source Real Estate, and HostGator. We're going to be telling you more about them throughout this episode.
All right, let's do this. I want to personally welcome each and every one of you out today to episode 379 of I Am Salt Lake podcast. I know there might be one or two of you listening for the very first time. I want to welcome you to the family. Thank you so much for downloading the show. If you're asking yourself, though, what am I about to listen to? What is I Am Salt Lake podcast all about? Well, this podcast is all about showcasing awesome people right here in Salt Lake City. We're talking to musicians, authors, restaurant owners, breweries, distilleries, all the good stuff right here in Salt Lake City. I think you guys get the idea. Anyone that might have a cool story to share. My name is Chris Hollifield, and I am here with my beautiful co-host, Chrissy. How are you doing over there today?
Oh my gosh, I am loving today because it is beautiful and sunny outside.
I don't want to be in here doing this podcast. I want to be out enjoying this beautiful weather.
I know, and we will. So
let's get through this.
Let's get through this, and then we'll go outside and we'll frolic. Today on the podcast, we actually got to sit down and talk with Christine Stenquist. She's the president and founder at TRUCE. We get to find out her story and what led her to become one of Utah's largest cannabis advocates. And we get to talk to her about the struggle of making cannabis recognized as a medicine here in the state of Utah. We talked Prop 2, and of course about the upcoming Utah Cann that City Weekly is putting on. We're going to be jumping into that conversation here in just a minute.
And of course, we're recording today right in beautiful downtown Salt Lake City in our podcast studio that is located right in the back of Empire Merchandise. Empire Merchandise is located at 680 South State Street. Now, not only does Empire have an amazing selection of vape juice and vape accessories, but this is where you can come and purchase your very own I Am Salt Lake podcast t-shirt. Stop on in, check this place out. It's a great addition to downtown Salt Lake City.
And if you want to stay on top of what's going on in the world of I Am Salt Lake, we also want to invite you to go sign up for our email list. It's an easy way to stay up to date. Just head right on over to iamsaltlake.com/email, and that will forward you to our email sign up.
Hey, before we jump into this conversation with Christine Stenquist, we're going to tell you about one of our awesome sponsors, Market Source Real Estate. Guys, if you love the charm and character of old homes, you need to contact our friends Monique and Jeremy Higginson of Market Source Real Estate.
For the past 17 years, they have been specializing in helping people buy and sell homes in the Sugar House and Greater Salt Lake area.
They have a great background of flipping houses, and they've owned almost 24 homes themselves, so they really know the ins and outs of older homes.
And if you're looking to sell your home, Market Source Real Estate specializes in helping sellers update or repair their homes to increase their value and make sellers more money.
And if you're looking to buy an old home, they really know what to look for in older homes so you don't end up buying a money pit. Their website, thinksaltlakecity.com, go check it out. Or just give them a call, 801-810-6773. And many thanks to Market Source Real Estate for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Let's jump into that conversation that we had with Christine Stenquist when she came and sat down with us and talked to us all about cannabis. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy. Now, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Utah or out of Utah?
I was born and raised in Miami, Florida.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I have roots here in Utah. My mother was born and raised in Ogden. Her family's from Ogden. We're the Marriotts. My family's settled Marriott Slaterville. So we have some deep roots here.
So what?
I was the distant cousin that grew up in the cool place in Miami.
What brought you from Miami to Salt Lake, or was there somewhere in between?
I moved out here when I was going through a divorce.
Okay.
And I needed space, and this is where I moved. I knew I had some extended family that lived here, and at 19, 20 years old, I moved out here with my young'un, and started a new life.
And here you are, and you're up to all kinds of crazy stuff,
Oh,
right?
dear. Yeah, here we are 27 years later.
You're
I'm going,
shaking it up.
what the heck?
Yeah. Well, no, and we'll get into that here on the recording. I mean, it's truly an honor to bring you on the podcast. You've been on the list to bring on, but I've always you're kind of a superhero in my eyes of everything you're doing here with the cannabis movement and everything. So let's jump right into that, actually, because we can get into so much with what's going on here in the state of Utah with cannabis. How did you get introduced to it? Like, what's the best way to start the
what's your story? Like, how did you eventually?
What's the origin story?
How did you find cannabis?
The start of my journey for medical cannabis really started back in 1996. At the time, I was 24 years old. I had been living here in Utah for about 4 or 5 years. I was working at Lakeview Hospital in Bountiful. At the time, that particular day, I was having a migraine, and I was walking specimens from the emergency room into the lab, and I called out to a colleague. I said his name, and then I passed out. And I woke up in the emergency room surrounded by my colleagues. I was in a patient position, and that was a little alarming. During the process of trying to figure out why I passed out, they discovered a mass, and the radiologist at that hospital didn't think it was much to be concerned about. I, however, disagreed, and I got copies of my CT scan, took it to my physician, and said, we've been dealing with migraines with me for years. Is this the source? Could this be the source? And he wasn't sure, sent me to get an MRI, asked me to stay nearby. Later on that evening, he called me into his office, and he told me that it was a brain tumor that they had discovered. And at 24, you sort of feel invincible. And so I think almost arrogantly, I said, okay, great. Now we know what it is. What do we do? How do we take care of it? It was just bold as brass. I didn't think anything of it. Hindsight always being a little clearer vision. I'm shocked at how bold I was. But he says, okay, we have to do other tests to figure out what kind of tumor it is and so on. I had to have surgery. They said because of where the tumor was placed, it was really close to my brainstem. And they told me to get my affairs in order. At the time, I had 2 children, sole custody. And so I needed to figure out who was going to be raising my babies. They gave me a 50% survival rate with the complications of what this surgery might do. While I was in surgery, they hit a blood vessel after getting 40% of the tumor out. And I started to hemorrhage and I slipped into a coma. And I was there for about 4 days. And slipping kind of in and out. I had coded a couple of times. When I finally came to, I had stroked. And so I had left side weakness. I spoke like a stroke victim, a lot of slurred speech, a tremendous amount of pain. I had lost the hearing in my left ear. And they told me they left 60% of the tumor. Because it was a benign tumor, they chose not to compromise my facial nerve. My tumor sits on my facial nerve, my hearing nerve, and my equilibrium nerve. So this was a complication for me because I couldn't go back to work. I was the sole care provider for my little family, me and my 2 children. I was a newly divorcee, and I had no way to really provide. So I had to file for disability. I filed for state assistance and food stamps and went on housing. And that began my journey for the next 16 years. For 16 years, I was pretty much bedridden and housebound. The pain that I suffered it's so intense. It was just unbelievable. Through those years, I've got multiple diagnoses. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, mostly because they couldn't really trace down why I was always in pain. I was diagnosed with complicated migraines, hemicranium continuum. It sounds like a fancy little name, but it is one of the sources of my pain. I also have trigeminal neuralgia, which is a facial nerve pain, and that affects my face, right above my eyebrow, on the cheekbone, and on the jawline. Those 3 branches of nerves going into my face are constantly sort of electrified, and they feel like they're on fire all the time. So there's times where my face feels numb, like it has an ice cream headache constantly, and I have those kinds of attacks. With trigeminal neuralgia, most of the patients who are diagnosed with that are terminal. It's forever. It doesn't go away. They don't know the source, and they don't know how to alleviate the pain. And it's also dubbed a suicide disease. this leads me to my point of why I wanted to try cannabis. I had been in a pain cycle in 2011 at the end of that year, going into 2012. I was not able to get out of bed. I wasn't eating. And I had hit a point where I was contemplating not being here on this plane of existence anymore. The pain and the suffering had been too much. I'd had enough. I had done something foolish, and I cut on myself, and my husband took me to the emergency room. And the doctor says, well, we can give you something for the pain. And I was at this point wanting to get off of the narcotics. I was on a fentanyl patch. I was getting dilaudid for shots. I was on Percocet 2 or 3 pills a day on top of the fentanyl. I was on antidepressants. I was on anti-anxiety medication, antispasmodics. I was barely existing. And I said, no, I don't want any more pain shots. I want to be off of this stuff. He says, there's nothing that I can give you that will alleviate your pain tonight. And that's when I knew I had to come up with another choice, an alternative.
How many years was this before? I mean, because you said 2012, so 1996. So, I mean, you've been on all these pain pills for like 10 years.
I was on them for 16 years.
16 years before you tried cannabis.
Correct. Wow. 16 years. And I had actually, worked my way up to being on a fentanyl patch and getting dilaudid shots and that kind of thing. Many times during those years, I would have to go into the hospital and do a detoxing where they would sort of wean me down to a level because I'd hit the ceiling. Your body
build
acclimates.
up a tolerance, and then you need more and more and more.
Exactly.
Ugh.
So your body acclimates to the dosage. It processes it differently. And so you don't get relief, and the detoxing itself is so incredibly painful. And it's, I was lucky because I'm in the hospital and I have support meds, they're giving you fluids and everything else, but it's withdrawal nonetheless. Yeah. And your body hurts and it craves the things that your physician has gotten you addicted to.
Well, and even like that amount of painkillers for that extended period of time probably creates additional health issues, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you guys can see me in studio, but I am 70, 80 pounds lighter than I was. I have lost a significant amount of weight. I mean, I'm back to where I was when I was diagnosed. Because I can be more active, I can sleep, I can eat. And that's kind of the journey that happened for me. So I'm miserable. I'm not doing well. My husband's having to take me to the bathroom. He's having to carry me to bathe me. I'm barely keeping applesauce down or Ensure down. We're talking about what are the other steps that need to be taken if I'm having to get IV fluids? Are we talking about a feeding tube? What's happening here? I tell my doctor that I want to try cannabis. I want to see if cannabis will help stimulate my appetite and I can start taking my pills again.
What year was this?
This was 2012.
Okay.
So this is the very end of 2011, that winter into 2012. And my physician, and I had also said to him, there's this substance called spice, and it's supposed to be legal cannabis that you can buy in the smoke shop.
I remember that.
Do you remember? This is
that stuff's horrible.
It is. It's not cannabis. For anybody who's listening, it's poison. Stay away from it. But in my ignorance, I'm a housewife. I'm a soccer mom. I didn't know any, but I just heard. I was hearing these things, and he says, "Well, don't try anything." My physician said, "Don't try anything legal. Don't use that stuff. I'm going to send you to another pain clinic and they'll start you on another therapy." So he sent me to a pain clinic, and that pain clinic saw me that day because at that point I was kind of just writhing and I was in cyclical vomiting. So I was constantly vomiting. They sent me to a pain clinic and they started me on a substance called Marinol. It's an FDA approved drug, synthesized THC.
Which is ridiculous.
Yes, but don't do anything legal.
Yeah. And we can even maybe get more into Marinol here in a little bit.
Yeah, we can. So I started that therapy, and about 2 weeks into it, I had to discontinue. The side effects of that prescription was just too much. I couldn't. But before I did, I started searching online about cannabis and Marinol and just wanted to read what other bloggers were writing, just wanted to see if other people were having experiences. I had to get outside of my little world. I lived in a bedroom. I lived in a bedroom. As I started to research online, I was reading terminology like whole plant access. I was reading terminology like a full cannabinoid profile, all these weird terms. I didn't understand what cannabinoids were, what are terpenes. Trying to figure out what this plant is doing, I discovered that Marinol is probably not the best thing for me, but I needed to get my hands on real cannabis. how do I do that? I didn't even know where to start with that.
Most people don't.
They don't.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But the first thing I did do is I made a phone call to my dad. My dad raised me a good portion of my life, especially in my young years. And I'm pretty close to him. And I called him and I said, hey, Dad, I want to use cannabis. And this is important to the story because my father's a narcotics officer.
Which I've heard, which is nuts.
It is. So my father...
Not here in Utah.
Not here in Utah.
Okay.
No, in a real dangerous place, Miami.
Okay.
So, no, I'm sorry. Like,
No, that's
he
fair.
did one of the largest cocaine busts in Miami on the marinas. So I can say without a shadow of a doubt, my father has seen some pretty horrendous. I've heard stories
Yeah.
and it's secondhand PTSD kind of thing. It's just
Wow.
awful. Just for context for the listeners, for a little history, Miami had the criminally insane and dumped on their shores from Cuba in the 70s and 80s. And that's when I grew up. And that's when Daddy was a narcotics officer and did undercover work. So that's
It's kind of the height of everything.
That's the height of, of Scarface, the whole thing.
Wow.
And so for me, getting my dad's perspective on this substance, I felt like I was going to a source that would understand. I've learned a lot since 2012.
What did your dad say? Do you care to share? Was he pro?
He was absolutely supportive.
Yeah.
He was supportive right out of the gate. He says, Chrissy, they're talking about that kind of stuff here in Florida. I'm seeing news articles, news reels. And there's all these old people down here, Chrissy, all the snowbirds, retire in Florida. So it's all the elderly people that are like, we want our weed.
Oh, yeah.
So it was I was shocked at first. And I cried too. I was like, to have that approval for, you should try anything. If it works, fantastic. Like, that's great. So I said, but Dad, I live in a state where it's not legal. And he laughed and said, oh, Chrissy, I'm sure you can find a bag of cannabis somewhere in Utah. I'm sure there's a bag.
Not very hard.
But it's harder than people think. When you look conservative leaning, or you just look like a mom.
People are afraid of you if you ask.
For pot.
And they're like, are you a cop?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, but Grandpa is. So it was hard. So what I had to do is I turned to my teenage daughter.
Yeah.
And I said, honey, does any one of your friends smoke cannabis? Do they smoke weed? And that's a double-edged sword too.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I just told her, quite frankly, I want to try cannabis, and the choice is buy the real cannabis, or I'm going to go to the smoke shop and see if this legal cannabis will work. And she's like, Mom, that stuff's not real.
The legal spice.
Yes. She's like, Mama, that stuff's not real. Don't touch that stuff, and I will find somebody. And she did. Another little teenage friend of hers. Now, these guys are 19, so I don't want to paint these are all graduates, but they're still teenagers. They're 19. I'm sure they were smoking it before 19. So her little friend came over and she showed me how to put cannabis in a pipe and smoke it up and use it for the first time. She helped us get our first bag of cannabis. And then her little friend, my daughter's friend, would come over often, like 2 or 3 times in the week, and just sit and visit with me in my bedroom because I wouldn't leave my bedroom. So for 3 or 4 days, well, it was almost a week, I had a towel rolled up at my door and I wouldn't let my kids come down the hall. I was terrified. I was so panicked at what was going to happen to them or me, or what if somebody outside smelled it, we'd lose our house and our kids and our dog, or, it just... fear.
You felt like a criminal
Absolutely.
for just trying to feel good.
Exactly. And it screwed with my head a little bit. Because the first time I used cannabis, within seconds of using it, my nausea subsided.
Yeah, I believe it.
And I wasn't quite expecting that. That's what the goal was. I thought it would take I didn't know. I mean, and there was a time before that I had used cannabis in a more leisure setting.
Recreational setting?
Yeah. When I was much, much younger, I used to manage a band. So there's the context. So I'll just leave it at that. But it was never done in a 1 or 2 doses or hits back in the day. And I was fine. This was a whole different sort of ball game. So when I first started using the cannabis, I started documenting. Like, I took 1 hit. I felt good for, 15, 30 minutes. I'd write down the time. Took the hit at this time. When I felt like I needed another hit because of symptoms returning, I'd write down the time that I took another one. I did that for 2 weeks and I started to feel a lot better. And I don't know if I could say it was just because of the cannabis, but what it did, it helped me sleep at night. It created the ability for me to have an appetite. It created the ability for me to be up and be mobile. Those enabling activities helped further my health.
Well, it seems like it gave you a sense of control and power over your own
Yes.
life that you previously didn't have.
Exactly. So 2 weeks into this, I start walking again using my cane. I'm just in my house, but I'm using my cane again. I'm getting my strength back again because I'm sleeping and I'm able to now get nourishment in my body and keep it down. After 2 weeks of that, 4 months later, 6 months later, I'm driving finally again. Still got my handicap sticker, still got my cane, but I'm starting to meet people out in the community. I want to share my story that I think that nobody else knows in the whole state. Oh my God, we got to tell people that cannabis really works.
Yeah. You're like, this is a miracle.
It is. It was like, I felt like Rip Van Winkle had been, like I was asleep for 16 years in this trapped in this miserable body that was so symptomatic. And then all of a sudden I smoke, Snoop's weed and holy cow, it's not just my mind was blown. I couldn't, but see, this took me on a whole different journey too. During those, 4 to 6 months as I was healing and recovering, I was all over the internet, reading, researching, becoming educated because I needed the why. I wanted to know how and why this was working in my body. How could I articulate what was happening to me if I didn't understand the science? How was I going to convince anybody in this state that this was a path forward for patients like me who had hit a pain wall or who had hit complications with the medical world they just couldn't get answers from? Education. I started researching and reading not only about cannabis itself and in the present and what we know now, but the history of prohibition to me was really important. I needed to understand why it became prohibitive. And if I understood that source, I felt like I could correct that source. Mm-hmm. And when I realized the source of that was just politics, it enraged me. It enraged me that that human race has been without this substance for 90 years.
It was very racial too.
Oh, it absolutely
very
was.
Racial.
It was very, and that's the thing that triggered.
Racist, I guess.
Correct. That was the thing that triggered me. Is when you get down to the why and you see the political nonsense that's going on and the messaging that was going on, and then you look at our everyday politics that we're experiencing now. It's the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's the same stuff, and we're seeing messaging and propaganda getting pushed out into our communities like it's fact. And I wanted to correct that false narrative. It was really vital to me that we corrected that this is not a gateway drug.
Yeah.
It had been disproven. I needed to correct that it had medicinal values. I needed to correct that it wasn't going to make black men rape white women.
Which they were telling.
That's what they were telling everybody in the 30s.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So there was a whole, and not just that, but just sort of the racism behind the drug war in itself. And I felt like my story lent itself to that narrative. My father's a narcotics officer. The drug war was announced in the 70s when he came out of the police academy. I mean, when Nixon came to Miami, my father was guarding him. Like this whole weird mapping of my story and how it goes to the drug war and criminal justice. I felt like I just had to lend it to where we're going.
Exactly.
It's just another voice in this chorus of change.
Let's actually take a quick break here. We need to play a couple messages from our sponsors. But then, we got a lot more we're going to get into here, Christine. So hang tight. We'll be right back. All right. It's that time of the podcast where we take just a couple minutes of your time and tell you about a couple of our awesome sponsors. Now, remember, when you support our sponsors, you are supporting this podcast. Hey, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Five Wives Vodka. Not only is Five Wives Vodka local, but they are very, very delicious. They have 3 different flavors that Chrissy and I are going to tell you about. They have the original Five Wives Vodka. This is the one that pulled me in. This is the one that said, oh my gosh, you guys, this is amazingly delicious. It is made from Utah mountain spring water. It's 100% distilled corn spirit and it's gluten-free. The spring is hidden in beautiful Ogden Canyon, so it's inaccessible by vehicle. So they're having to hike this water out 5 gallons at a time.
That's commitment to deliciousness, if you ask me.
I think so.
And for those of you who like a little more spice in your drink, you have to check out Five Wives Sinful. Sinful is a delicious cinnamon flavored vodka. It's unlike other cinnamon products that leave that cinnamon candy taste in your mouth. Sinful is like a morning cinnamon roll, and it only has 76 calories per ounce.
There's also the Five Wives Heavenly. This is a flavored vodka with a delicious vanilla taste. Heavenly's rich, buttery vanilla flavor comes through without coating your taste buds with sugar, and this results in more vanilla and less calories. Head on over to their website, fivewivesvodka.com. This is where you can find out more information about them, recipes, all that good stuff. But just head on down to the state liquor store, pick up a couple bottles, one for you, one for a buddy, right?
Maybe one of every flavor. When you have people visit, you have something for everybody.
You're a very high achiever there.
I am.
I like that.
Look, I'm a good host.
Or the next time you head on over to your favorite local bar, ask for Five Wives Vodka by name, because every time you take a shot of Five Wives Vodka, you are supporting this podcast. And many thanks to Five Wives Vodka for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Hey, this episode of the podcast is also sponsored by HostGator. You know, we talk to a lot of local businesses in here, a lot of people that are kind of doing their own little side hustle, and so many of them don't have a website. Blows me away, because having your own website is actually very, very easy, and HostGator helps make it easy. So head on over to HostGator.com and use the promo code podcast. This is going to give you 30% off. We've actually been using HostGator for the past 7 years to host IamSaltLake.com. And I'll tell you, I could not be more happy. They have amazing customer service. They offer a free website builder with 4,500 templates for you to pick from. HostGator is actually one of the world's most popular web hosting companies for a reason. They offer a guaranteed 99.9% uptime, an excellent user-friendly interface via cPanel, and superb pricing. Again, HostGator.com. Head on over there, check it out. Use the promo code podcast. This is going to support us, and it's going to give you 30% off of your website. So go check it out, support them, and many thanks to HostGator for sponsoring this episode. Let's jump back into that conversation with Christine Stenquist as we talk about cannabis. Thank you so much for listening. Here we go. You know, a lot of people will ask me this, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'll try to tell them, I'll try to tell them, hey, I believe, marijuana should be legal and blah, blah, blah. And their first thing is, well, they moved to Colorado. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, why didn't, at that time, especially, this was back, you said 2014, right?
Yeah.
Why didn't you just move to Colorado, especially in your condition? Because it was legal there, right? Mm-hmm. No, in Colorado.
2014, it became recreational.
In Colorado?
Yep.
Why didn't you go to Colorado?
My family resources and everything are here. Why would I want to uproot everything I know because you're uncomfortable with something I'm using in my home?
Well,
I felt like that was ridiculous.
That's what I say too. But at the same time, you're kind of made to believe that that's what you're supposed to do.
And I'll just tell you this right now for listeners too. Don't move to Colorado. They can't support you. They don't have the jobs. They don't have the housing infrastructure. They don't have the ability to house all the sick people in the United States. It is up to us to be self-sufficient within our own states. That's what Utah preaches. We are about being self-sufficient. We're not about chasing people away because we don't like the way they look.
Yeah.
Or what they need. At least that's not what should it be. So when I hear people say, oh, you just should leave, I think it's the rudest thing until it happens to you. It's very arrogant to say that. I think it's part of our community to challenge some of these ignorant thoughts.
Well, there was a lot of that, especially on Facebook when the whole Prop 2 thing.
Well,
that's a whole mess in and of itself.
No, but during
it was on the dumpster fire.
The Prop 2 thing, I heard that left and right, especially from Mormon LDS people, and I'm just like, well, that's not very nice. Like, that just seems very rude.
It's tough because they don't realize when they're saying things like that if something were to happen to them, like what happened to you, if their child developed, something that the only thing that could help is cannabis, it would completely change the way they looked at everything. And if they would only be open-minded enough to realize that just because it's not happening to you doesn't mean that it's not genuinely affecting other people.
Well, that's where the compassion needs to come in. And that was part of my messaging in one of the very first press conferences we did with patients. That is the driving force. You should be compassionate that people can't just up and leave. They don't have the money or the resources to. Today, right now, I would challenge anybody to get online line and figure out how to find a job and how to find a location for your family to relocate, say goodbye to your sources of support here locally, and try to find those sources of support as you're being diagnosed with, I don't know, say cancer. Mm-hmm. You just got diagnosed with terminal cancer. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously? Are you kidding me with that? No, that's not compassionate. And that is certainly not the Utah way. So when people say ignorant, foolish things like that, you have to look at why they're saying it. It's a source of fear. It comes from a place of fear. They don't know what bringing cannabis program into the state is going to do. And what the opposition tried to do is drive and hit on that fear. We don't want this here. Mm-hmm. This is going to be recreational. You need to move out of here. You need to go away. We need to shun you. That's not appropriate. And that's not adult-like thinking. Let's just be honest.
Well,
that's
like
childish.
when Prop 2 was up for debate, some of the, I guess, anti-Prop 2ers put a U-Haul bus by a school saying,
Yes.
like,
I remember that.
for those who don't know, it was like free marijuana for, I don't know, it was to prove that marijuana was going to be dangerous and near children and to scare everyone into voting against it.
They were trying to prove a point of what 600 yards were from a school. And so with this mobile, and all that, again, is propaganda. Like I would call yellow journalism, like back in the 1930s that they use, black men are going to rape white women. And this is what's going to happen in our culture. This is what's going to happen in our culture. The kids are going to be coming out of the school and walking right into a U-Haul truck, buying all kinds of brownies and suckers.
Just like lollipops.
We're all going to be high and LSD trips for everybody. It just was.
That sounds wonderful, though.
This is like, sign me up.
Yeah.
No, it was all based in fear. They were trying to drive home that Prop 2 was a recreational bill, which it never was. You had to have a diagnosis on the conditions list, and you had to have a relationship with your physician to do that. The thing that drove them crazy and made them uncomfortable was the clause that we had in there. If a program wasn't up and functioning by 2021, patients could grow their own.
Yeah.
That was to hold their feet to the fire to make sure brick and mortar got in place for our patients, and they didn't dilly-dally. Because that's what they're going to do. That's what they do in every single state. And that's what they did with the replacement bill. They went in and they said, you know what? We're yanking this. People who compromise says, yes, we didn't really want home grow. It was just a way to get to the table. And they undermined patient access. Now we've got this bill that's in place that bumps up against federal law in a sense that's not protected. We are now making our health departments dispense cannabis. So we are effectively making state employees break federal law.
And do they realize that?
Yes. I told Greg Hughes. I mean, Urquhart and me, our lobbyists, we all went in there. No, they don't care because the whole point was never to actually implement a program that could be viable. Mm-hmm. Because if there's problems, delayed implementation, nobody's holding their feet to the fire. Nobody's going to be growing because they pulled that clause out because the people who compromise.
They're saying you guys won, you voted for it, but it's impossible to actually follow through.
Well, we didn't win, though, because they
they replaced it. This is the thing, too, that I want to tell people, because there was a lot of discouraged people after this all happened, because it wasn't just my issue that has been poo-pooed on. We saw Prop 2 pass, and it was the first one on the chopping block. We saw Medicaid come. That was the next one on the chopping block. Prop 4 will be the next one. What we have is a much deeper problem in our state, and it's apathy. It's apathy from our voters, but we ignited them by providing this opportunity to be part of Utah history and vote on medical cannabis. So they believed us, 78,000 new registered voters, historic for Utah, signed up, voted, mostly just voted for the propositions. And I will challenge that they showed up for medical marijuana, medical cannabis, and by proxy just got the other two on board too, because they were doing a lot of the signature gathering at the same time. So what I want to challenge the people to do is get involved in the politics.
Sure.
You have to get involved in the electoral process. You can't just show up for voting day and expect great change to happen. You did make great change happen. You passed initiatives, 3 of them. That's amazing. And I think voters should applaud themselves for that. That's kind of phenomenal, but it doesn't stop there. I mean, you showed up for Super Bowl and that's it. You need to show up for preseason. You need to show up for preseason training, which means right now. Next year is the election, 2020. I don't want to wait till November to see your face.
Yeah.
I need to see you getting into the caucusing. I need you to be there helping find new delegates. and new people to run for office and support those individuals. We need better candidates. And I don't care what party you're affiliated with. That's not my job. It's not my job to flip seats from one party to another. My job, I honestly believe, is to empower people to take their power back. We need to start being more politically engaged in a process because we're getting screwed.
When did you decide to start getting into the political process and really, I mean, because were you always interested in it?
No.
Yeah, okay. Because for people like me who just are like, I don't even know what to do, I wouldn't know where to go.
I was the same way.
What's a good
medical
first step?
field was sort of my heart. I wanted to be a nurse, and that's why I worked at the hospital. You know, I was working my way into nursing school, and that kind of sidestepped. It was trying to procure medical cannabis and trying to figure out why other states were having it legal, why we couldn't have it legal, why was it being federally illegal. Just trying to learn the minutia of that because an issue was important to me. It woke me up to everything else. And I got caught up in the elections like everybody else. Like Obama came on the scene in, what was that, 2008?
Yeah.
When he first came out, I was super excited. Like, this is great. 4 years later, probably not so much great, but still, I was still engaged in the process. It was exciting, but only around election day. I was one of those people I'm chiding. There wasn't something out there that woke me, that spoke to me, that like women's rights, there wasn't something like
that stayed with you day to day. That was
right. That was impacting my life. And I think that's the key is people don't think politics impacts their lives on a daily basis. And until an issue actually does that to you, you don't do or say anything. There are those individuals who just are born with that in them. I think I've always been a bit of an underdog fighter. My friends would probably say that. But diving into the issue and the process and trying to find a bag, and then how am I going to continue? How can I keep this up? I can't keep this up because it's dangerous for everyone along the line. It's dangerous for the illegal grower. It's dangerous for the buyer, the dealer. It's dangerous for all of us along the road. I would sit and talk with my dealers, and I was one of the very first patients that some of these kids, and they were kids. I mean, they were young 20-somethings. That they'd ever experienced and met with. And I would take that opportunity and time and start talking to them about cannabis and what I was learning and stuff. And did you know this? Did you know? They thought it was the weirdest thing, but moving from that, just sharing that with my dealers or whoever, I started to expand on social media. Yeah. I started to go into the Facebook pages and ask people about cannabis, or I would word search, and any comment that was ever mentioned about cannabis would pop up. Anybody who made an intelligent comment got a message from me. I said, hey, my name's Christine Stenquist. I'm a brain tumor patient. I saw that you wrote, and I'd screenshot whatever. What are your thoughts about it? And I would get whatever information I could from them, stored it up, and then went on to the next person. But I started trying to figure out how to be part of the process. Somebody encouraged me to go to the convention, to the Democrat convention. And I just showed up to convention, and I was like, this is a weird process. What's going on here? Yeah. And, and I would sit in the caucus room, and I don't know who was in there, but people would start walking in, and I'm just watching. People were saying, does anybody have a question for the candidate? And I just impulsively, I do. What are your thoughts about medical cannabis? I literally got a hush, because it was Sim Gill at the time. Oh. And it didn't register to me who any of these people are.
Because people weren't talking about this at all.
No,
here, right?
Not at all. And so, he gave his statement, and I thought, wow, I liked what he had to say. And then the next candidate, I asked the same thing. I was like, this is just an ongoing question. And from that convention, I just started asking other people, because I did mention, I'm a brain tumor patient, and I've used cannabis, and it's absolutely changed my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm out of bed because of it. And I plan on pushing this issue. And people at that point in time, I think, were taken back and did a little bit of the, isn't she cute? Isn't that sweet?
Before it was a discussion, it's just like, what are you really getting at?
Yeah, why are you here,
so much
lady?
Propaganda was out there that it's not actually medicinal. And so you had to you were a one-woman team fighting that stigma.
From day one. Well, within my own world, I need to mention, because I think it's important to recognize there are so many supporters of medical cannabis in the state. I've been told this, and I can kind of see it. I view myself more like a catalyst. Like, there were all these components that were here, and I was just the thing that needed to be added to the mix to make it all come together. There are so many advocates in Utah, so many wonderful advocates who, once this movement really started to get generated by me and others, they came up full force and ready, boots on the ground. So I don't, as much as I know my role in story, I don't want to discount any of those other voices and people, because it took us creating a groundswell in Utah to make this happen. It truly did. But it did start on Facebook. It did start with me showing up to coffee shops. There were Students for Sensible Drug Policy. There was a gentleman by the name of Zach Baker, and he started this group with another gal at the colleges, and it was just students trying to work on drug policy reform. I showed up to one of their coffee shop talks. At the time, they were working on the naloxone bill, and this was back in 2014 as well. I was very interested in that. Being a patient that was on heavy opioids, there were times that when I was in the emergency room and they would give me a shot, my husband would have to honey, you need to wake up. You're not breathing. They won't give you any more meds. Your heart rate is dripping down really low. So I know there were accidents that have happened in this state because of that. There was a need for naloxone to be here. And so I helped lobby that issue with Zach. He was sort of the main advocate. He was the one that, gave testimony committee and stuff. And we were just sort of a support to him as he did that. My first time I lobbied that was in front of Representative Carol Spackman Moss. And I had a group of kind of religious individuals who were working on poverty issues up on the Hill. And we were just standing around waiting, and I told them about this naloxone bill that was about to happen, and they got very excited. And so they started sharing information. So these tiny little experiences, I was sort of cataloging that this is how you get involved in politics. You talk to people, and you find out where they are and if they're supportive of your efforts and if they have talents that can yield it. Talking with Carol Spackman Moss, she sort of guided me to the legislative website. She told me where certain bills were. Didn't know where any of that stuff was before. And so I could get in there and read a little bit. I would ask somebody else, what the heck does caucus mean anyway? I don't understand that terminology. Or what's a delegate? What does a delegate do? I just started asking people around me. But I created an environment where people were around me. I had to go where people were and be brave enough to openly talk about cannabis.
And that's another question. How nervous were you? Were you ever afraid that you'd get arrested, that, you would say the wrong thing?
Oh, and I carried medicine with me all the time. There's no way that I could function out in the world without it. And so I'd have to excuse myself, and I'd use my little vape pen so I could get my tremors to stop or, get my nausea under control. So it was a game of learning how to use my medicine so I could just mitigate my symptoms so I can still be functional and articulate and get my message across so they didn't think I was a stoner, and still keep my symptoms under control. Because people don't know it. When they look at me, they don't realize that I'm still a patient.
You look you're very vibrant and healthy and energetic. And it's not something that I would guess just meeting you in public. What you've gone through.
It's a very different Christine from just 10 years ago. It's been, this journey now has taken 7 years, but 10 years ago, my kids have never seen this, Mom. My oldest child was 5 when I went down. She's 27 now.
What do your kids think of all this?
At first, my daughter, I think, was very hesitant and reluctant. I think she didn't quite know what to make of it. My oldest son was absolutely supportive and 100% on board. He suffers from migraines as well. So when he would see me have migraines and I'm throwing up and, writhing, he can relate. He's experienced it. And when he saw me use cannabis and that it mitigated my symptoms, he was just blown away. And my other children that were a bit younger than those two, I think they were not quite sure what to make of it. My youngest boy is 11 right now, and all he's really can remember is this. For 7 years, Mom has been advocating. He doesn't know anything else. He's like a little cannabis talking machine all the time. He just knows the movement. And I have a 19-year-old, almost a 19-year-old. For him, I think it's a little bit bittersweet. He does remember me being down, and he knows those years, and he remembers the emergency room visits and Mom crying in the back bedroom and nobody can come over. As soon as I got well, I didn't stay home and be with him and play with him. I got out in the community and started becoming active. So for that boy, he's a little sad. that he's lost his mom to a movement for a while. We've reconnected, and I've been able to talk and spend time with him and try to help him understand that the sacrifice during those years to help raise awareness in our state was so meaningful. And I know that it took my time away from him, but we were actually giving time back to other families in the state to have with each other. And it's going to take more time with him and more of a journey, but there is a lot of sacrifice that came with getting this movement started in Utah. I don't regret it because I know it all had some meaning. It's just sad that sometimes that has to be the consequence, that there has to be a little bit of pain and sorrow to enjoy the sweet. And that's what we're starting to enjoy here in Utah. You know, there's so many of us that have dedicated so much time to this effort and to this movement. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all of it.
I want to talk a little bit about TRUCE, just because I don't know a whole lot about it, and maybe I should get more active in it if people like myself are allowed to get active in it. What exactly is it? What does it even stand for?
You bet. So I was telling you about my journey. I started using cannabis, and about 6 months in, I was starting to drive. 8 months after that, I found my way to Capitol Hill. I found out there was a legislator, Mark Madsen, at the time Senator Madsen, was going to be running a whole plant cannabis bill. And so I made an appointment to meet with him, and he said, sure, come on in. And I told him my story. I brought another patient with me. She was a Crohn's patient who had a job in California and lived here with her husband, or soon-to-be husband. He was a student at the U. So she traveled back and forth. She was also a cannabis journalist. So in California, she was a legal patient. She could use, but when she traveled to Utah, she couldn't.
She was a criminal here.
She was a criminal here because she couldn't use her cannabis. Cannabis put her Crohn's in remission. And my part of the story was, I'm a brain tumor patient. I can't even leave to go get that. I can't even, but the whole point being, our disease states don't leave when we travel or cross state lines. We need to implement something that makes sense for people who travel here and people who live here. So Madsen was really impressed with our stories and said, hey, this next meeting I'm going to is about this topic. I would love for you ladies to come share that story with these individuals. We said, sure, not knowing anything about politics still. I walked into the room and we were introduced to the Utah Medical Association, the Sutherland Institute, and Eagle Forum. I don't know if you guys know who any of those individuals are.
Eagle Forum, I'm a little familiar
with. Sutherland Institute is basically, a policy institute that's affiliated with the church, we'll just say. And then Utah Medical Association has been against medical cannabis from the moment the epilepsy mom showed up on the Hill in 2014. So they were in the room. So this was the opposition. This is Mark was going to them to try to get their understanding. I don't know if persuasion, but at least understanding, like, we're being courteous. This is coming. We want to give you a heads up. We'll take in some input. I don't think they quite know what to make of our stories because we both are telling stories of this helped us. The gal that was there from Eagle Forum asked if she could stay and visit with us a little longer after the meeting was over. So I was like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah. She started asking us more questions and she became a believer. She wanted to help. So she started helping in that process. She reached out to people in her conservative group. She was just blown away. This lady just doesn't like pharmaceutical drugs. She's mostly about herbs and using holistic type approaches, like clean, healthy living. So the idea that this herb could be used medicinally and had such redeeming qualities and properties for disease states got her excited. She was like, I want to be part of this effort. We went into that 2015 session with me and that patient. And then the gal I told you, I think off the air, there was a lady down in Utah County who heard about my story because I was doing press at the time saying that I used cannabis illegally in Utah, that I was a brain tumor patient and I wanted to create a program. She showed up on the Hill with her little 6-week-old baby and told us the most phenomenal story. She'd been diagnosed with cancer at 14 weeks along in her pregnancy, and it was lymphoma. And she didn't want to do chemotherapy. She wanted to give her child the best fighting chance it could. She did a lot of research and reading and found that cannabis might be a solution. So she left the state. She moved to Colorado so she could use it legally to see if it could at least put her cancer in remission while the baby was born. And then she was, figure out the next steps there. She did that. She came home, had a healthy baby, and saw my story. Her son, I think at the time, was 2 or 3 weeks old. She showed up on the Hill and started advocating with me in 2015, telling them I used cannabis. I juiced it. She was juicing it, which was phenomenal because, well, you use the green leafy fawns.
Okay.
So it's not, some people, when they think of cannabis, they think of the baggie that, that's the flower that you get.
Yeah.
Well, this is the actual fawn on the plant, the leaves, the long leaves that you see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The leaves.
Yeah.
You use those and you put them in a blender and juice them. And you can add that to a smoothie and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And that has THCA, you've heard of THC. This is before heat is added. It's non-psychotropic, but has the same reparative and redeeming qualities as THC. There's a process that happens with this plant when heat and age happen to it. Different cannabinoids become more powerful and more potent. And so she was telling them about how juicing cannabis really helped put her cannabis in remission, and it wasn't psychoactive. So we were trying to give them an idea that there's more to this than just CBD. We wanted to expand their minds on, okay, you learned about CBD last year, and thank you for passing the CBD for the epilepsy people. But even there's more people that need access, and they only passed it for 2 very, very rare conditions of epilepsy. So not all epileptics can use it. At any rate, they enjoyed listening to our stories, but it wasn't really convincing people. We were getting the rhetoric of, why don't you just move them? Why don't you leave the state? Go to a state where it's legal and really stop messing with us. Or I was actually standing there when one of the representatives said to this lady that lobbied with us, just use it. Just use it here.
Oh, wow.
That was a sitting legislator telling an advocate, just break the law. Do it for your own health. That was the counsel that was given by an elected official. They probably all
are up there already.
Well, that could be the case, but it felt like to me is that there's no ownership of responsibility our elected officials wanted to take on this. They didn't want to take on a hard topic. Why? Too hard. It doesn't make any sense.
It used to be political suicide, I believe.
Oh, absolutely.
Now I think actually the next presidential election, I think that's going to be a
huge topic. It is.
And if you're not for it, I doubt you'll get voted in. I think the next president, that has to be almost a big thing, because I think that's why a lot of people voted for Obama, thinking Obama was going to legalize it.
And he was pretty harsh on cannabis users. Yeah. He did one of the highest arrests.
Yeah.
So
well, he came across in the beginning that he was pro.
Right.
And I think if Trump, if he could have one redeeming thing about him is I think if he just legalized it,
Yeah. And I don't expect anything to happen this year. Yeah. There's over 50 pieces of federal legislation right now trying to deal with cannabis, dealing with banking, there's so many bills on the Hill right now. I don't see many of those passing at all.
Yeah.
The only one that has maybe a fighting chance is the States Act. It's by Cory Gardner out of Colorado, but I don't see that actually. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the Senate, so we'll see what happens on the federal level. There is a desire for rescheduling to happen, but what that looks like and how, it's a mess. There's so much that they have to take care of on the federal level, and they keep pointing the finger to the international level. Well, the UN is not going to be ruling on cannabis until probably December, if not next March. They postponed ruling on descheduling cannabis earlier this year, last month. In fact, they said we're not going to do a vote on the rescheduling next month, which would have been April, which means that it's all delay. But what's happening right now is there's a groundswell. There's a legitimate groundswell, not only just in our own state of Utah, but within the country and within globally. Globally, we have 38 countries that have decriminalized cannabis. There's 95 countries, something like that.
Yeah.
So, that's tiny. So if you can kind of look at the microcosm of how this has to go, it started within my own little county. I started to find people within my own little circle. I started to have the conversation. The state started to grow. And then we just get bigger and bigger and seeing where this process kind of takes us.
Do you think most people right now, there's so much information on the internet and people that truly believe that it's horrible. It's like, do you really think they think that, or do you think they have to say that? Like, especially everyone on Capitol Hill. I think there's so much information of how good it is.
But I also think if you are going to feed your own opinion, your own fears, you're finding material that feeds that. And we're all guilty of that.
The internet is the best place for confirmation bias.
Yes!
If you believe that it's bad, you're going to find everything that says it's bad.
But it just seems like there's more good about it. I mean, how many states have medical? I mean, 46?
We have like 47 states that have some form of medical cannabis
out
program.
Of 50, that's ridiculously awesome.
It is. We have 16 that have CBD only and 32 that have 33, I think it is now, that have a whole plant program like we do. But not one of those programs, is an A+. Let's start with that. Not one of those programs is a stellar program. And not one of those programs is identical to another state. We have 46 different experiments going on with medical cannabis programs. It's insane. I mean, it's craziness across the board. And it's indicative of every issue that the government's got its hands in, though. It's just chaotic.
And I realize it's not going to help everybody.
Right.
I don't know if you listen to much Joe Rogan. He had a guy on recently that wrote a book. I don't know if you listened to this episode. Gosh, I should have wrote down the name of it. But it was basically saying that it was horrible and it's going to create this like psychotic generation if we legalize it. And
everyone's going to have depression.
Even Joe Rogan was, he's obviously very pro. I mean, they smoke on the show and the whole 9 yards. Sorry, by the way, we didn't have it here for you, but
we are the worst hosts.
Anyway, I do agree with him. Joe Rogan even says it's not going to help everybody. Some people actually it isn't, but same thing with pain pills. Right?
Exactly.
They're going to have a hard time with it.
From my understanding,
some people might not have a good time
pain
with
medicine
opiates.
only helps 30% of the population.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because 80% of the population uses it almost. We're so indoctrinated to popping a pill.
And I've seen so many people go to the hospital because they're on pain medication. Like they hurt themselves, they have to go on opioids, and then something happens and intestinal damage.
Yeah.
And then it's more hospitalization and it's just further and further.
Yep. And I don't want to completely poo-poo on the pharmaceutical industry because they have their place and their purpose, but everything in life has to have moderation. And if the first thing you think of when you have an ache or pain is run to the doctor, and maybe that philosophy needs to stop. Maybe there's a midpoint. Maybe there's something in between. Maybe cannabis can help a lot of patients and they don't have to venture into the doctor and drive up our healthcare costs with pharmaceuticals and procedures and everything else trying to chase down pain or phantom whatevers. It's another tool in the toolbox. I want to arm our physicians with as much as they can do. What I told my doctor when I started to get better, I said, now I can go work out. Now I can exercise. Now I can eat right. Yeah. Now I can. Now this gives me, it mitigated my symptoms enough that I got homeostasis, which means I was functioning well.
I want to talk about we're a medical state now here in Utah.
Yes, we are.
And I want to get a little bit into that here before we completely lose you here for the day. How do people go about that? I mean, obviously I realize you're not a lawyer. This isn't legal advice, but I don't think a lot of people realize they can go get a recommendation from their doctor.
Yes. So I'm not giving legal advice. Yeah. I'm just telling you what's the law. So that's not. That's just and I know you were very part of it. So you're going to know a lot more than I do. So where we are right now in Utah, with the current law that's in place, a patient needs to get a recommendation from their physician. Recommendation is only able to be gotten if you have some of the disease states that's listed there, or you suffer from pain longer than 2 weeks. You have to have a relationship with your physician already, meaning, you're not supposed to be going around just doctor shopping trying to find that one doc. The problem we're running into is not all physicians are wanting to write recommendations. The way the verbiage is written in the law, there's a clause about dosing parameters that is giving a lot of physicians pause. That is prescribing, and a doctor can lose their license if they're prescribing cannabis. It's federally illegal for them to do that. They can talk about it. They can recommend, why don't you try that? But our legislators took it a step further and they said, no, they have to write dosing parameters. And if they don't, the pharmacist does. In no real world do we have a pharmacist writing prescriptions for people. But our legislators in all their wisdom with HB 3001 thought that was a good little tick to put in there. We don't have that in other states. What we do see in other states was you do see the free market take that on. You do see physicians and pharmacists who decide to get educated about that and guide patients, but it's never part of their law that it has to be a dosing or recommendation parameters put in place. That was kind of jumbly, but so I'm a little confused as why our legislators went that route if they know that doctors are not going to want to recommend. And
just to create one more stumbling block for people.
I think so. I think it's to create.
So, like, if you do get a recommendation, this is very ignorant because I don't know anything.
Nothing's
but
ignorant.
If someone was to go and get a recommendation, there's no dosing, whatever.
Right now, what you
go
have
to a pharmacist and you say, "Hey, could you please write dosing here for me?" Or like,
no. What we have right now, and let me explain, and this is probably where the confusion is.
Yeah.
We're in this weird little phase right now where we don't have an actual program in place, meaning the health department isn't up and running. You can't go and get your health, your recommendation card. You have right now what is called an affirmative defense letter. It's just saying the doctor stating, yes, they have this condition. And if the program was up and functioning right now, they would be able to get a recommendation.
Okay.
So it's a little looser right now, but even doctors under that loose parameter don't want to write it.
Well, yeah, because
it's still,
they could get in trouble.
Yeah.
If
well, that's what they view.
Or if,
yeah. And so we have some physicians in Utah who are willing to do it. I have a physician on my board who's been, my gosh, I think he's up to 200, 300 recommendations he's done since the passage of HB 3001 in December. So he's done a fair amount, but within his own clinic, he's had his partner say, we're going to have to kind of cap.
Really?
How much? Well, if your practice is just seeing these cannabis patients and what you've created, what the legislators have created is now there's only a very few select doctors who are willing to do this and take that risk, whatever the risk is perceived to be. Patients are having a hard time getting in. They can't find these golden goose doctors anywhere, See,
and I'm proud of, I just want to give my mom props. I'm proud of her. She's a geriatric nurse practitioner. And so she is very pro recommendation for especially geriatric people who have a lot of health issues. And she was one of the first people to write a recommendation from her. What is it called?
Nice.
The location she's at.
Nice. So, go mom. Thank you.
Mom. Woo. Woo. Yay.
No, we need supporters. I think it's really hard. The nice thing I think I'm going to give Dr. Talbot a shout out. The nice thing about Dr. Andrew Talbot is he has taken over 40 hours of CME courses on cannabis. He has been taking the time and the energy and the effort to educate himself because he saw this coming. He's been doing it over the past year and a half or more. I appreciate physicians that take that on, that see and recognize that the patient population is changing. This is something that's going to be coming to his practice, and he wanted to get ahead of it. He wanted to be there for his patients. I would encourage and challenge any physician, any nurse practitioner that can hear me right now, do that. Be preemptive. Get educated about this substance and join us. We need your voices. We need to hear what doctors are concerned about in this process, because I think that might help us write better legislation that makes it comfortable for patient and physicians. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters, is the patient and the physician relationship, not the legislative relationship between a constituent.
This is such an amazing point.
Yeah.
I mean, you never hear people talking about that the doctors need to actually get involved and get educated and come to the aid of the patients.
We need to honor that relationship that goes on between doctors and patients, and even caregivers. There's a lot of people in our world. Epilepsy Association of Utah is sort of my partner in crime. They're the first patient advocacy group that was out there, and this will bleed into why TRUCE and who TRUCE is.
Yeah.
But they were the first advocacy group out there on the Hill advocating. They were the ones that brought the CBD only legislation to the Hill in 2014. I approached Doug Rice, who is now the sitting president of that organization. And I said, we need to keep partnering. We need to partner. I know that your patient population needs greater access than CBD only. And then he told me and shared his story about his daughter who is nonverbal, has epilepsy, and they went to Colorado. She's on CBD oil. He gave her a gummy with THC in it, and she went without seizures for 2 days. He's like, I agree with you, Christine. We have to do that. And so these two organizations have built a coalition to help raise awareness about this issue. When we were advocating in 2015, we saw a need and a desire to sort of label us patients, our group, these people I was finding on the Facebook. I was plopping into a Facebook group, And a friend of mine, somebody who was an advocate, we went to an ad agency. Shout out to Super Top Secret. I'm just giving all kinds of plugs. I hope you don't mind.
No, I love it.
This is fantastic.
I love
Right? Shout out to Super Top Secret because they were just bless their hearts. I walked in and I said, listen, this is what I've created. This is the group. It's a group. It's a melting pot. We've got Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Green Partiers. We've got people who are atheists and people who are theists. I've got Mormons, non-Mormons. All types are part of this group. Help me create us. And they gave me a bunch of different ideas and stuff. And we came up with TRUCE. And TRUCE is an acronym for Together for Responsible Use in Cannabis Education. I want to help promote what responsible use of cannabis is like. And that doesn't mean, for those who are listening, that doesn't just mean medical. I am supportive of what adult use can look like. I know that our state's not ready and prepared for that. But when we are, sure as hell, TRUCE is going to be there. We want to be there to help champion that. We believe that cannabis is a better substance for an adult use than alcohol is, and not to poo-poo because I know who supports you guys.
Oh, hey, I get it.
In all things.
Yeah.
Right?
But I want to be there for that conversation. So Together for Responsible Use in Cannabis Education fit. It felt comfortable with us. They were very conscious of the fact that I wanted to stay away from the leaf and the overtones of the cannabis movement because we were in Utah and I was really searching those caregivers out. I was looking for those moms and the female voice to come up because we really truly are the caregivers of our family. And I felt like if moms could get on board with this and really say, hey, there's a responsible thing that's happening here and we can really do this. That's why I felt TRUCE could exist.
And so how can listeners, could they get involved with TRUCE at all? What's the story there?
Yes, we have a volunteer group and we're starting to open it up. It was kept really small in the very beginning because they were just my little lobbying team. And now we're trying to open up our volunteer group a little more. You can find us on Facebook, but you also can find us on our website is truceutah.org. And on our website, on the volunteer, it has a whole list of things that we're looking for. And you go on there and you click whatever talents, skill sets, assets that you may have that you feel like this movement can provide, and we'll call on you if we need it. And we've had a lot of people reach out lately. They're like, I need to be more involved. We're doing panel events. We do a lot of panel events. We'd like to get out and do more community events with people. We need more foot soldiers though. I can't be all over the state tabling, but we can start getting more patients educated. We're going to be at Utah Cann. Yeah,
I was just going to ask, actually. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that. Or it's not a conference. It's a
convention.
Convention conference deal.
So it's put on by City Weekly. Mm-hmm. So I got to give a shout out to them too. Yeah. City Weekly is putting it on. John Solstice is a gem and a half. He came to us last year and said, hey, we're going to put this thing together. And I was terrified. I'm like, no, don't do this. Like the conservatives will freak out if you're bringing a cannabis convention here right before election. Don't do this. And he says, no, it's going to be great, fantastic. And he threw it and it was lovely. He brought in fantastic speakers and researchers, vendors, and all kinds of stuff surrounding cannabis and hemp. And he's doing it again this year.
But this time it's bigger.
It's bigger. Right? He's having it at the fairgrounds, Salt Lake Fairgrounds. It's on May 10th and 11th. And I think they both days start at 9 a.m. And since your listeners are listening to me, if you go to their website, the Utah Cann website, and plug in TRUCE 19, you can get a discount on your tickets for this.
Awesome.
So if you have to put TRUCE in all caps.
I'll put the link at iamsaltlake.com with this episode.
Fantastic.
So that way, if you didn't write that down, as well as the TRUCE 19, you said?
TRUCE 19. So 2019 and then the word TRUCE.
TRUCE.
Yep, all caps. And you get a discount, and we'll be there. I'm bringing former Senator Urquhart. I'm hoping that Sim Gill will be there. We'll have, one of our people will be on panels. They'll have lots of panels there. They'll have guest speakers who are from across the country that can really articulate what's happening in the cannabis movement. Because we're kind of young here in Utah to the scene. We don't know a lot, and this is our effort and our hope to get people educated about the process so that we can eliminate some of the fears.
Maybe we'll bring some portable recording equipment and get some conversations really cool. with Sim and Steve. And I really need to get John Solstice in here too for an interview.
You should, and get him in here before the May
We'll see.
Quick, let's call him right now.
Yeah, no, he's been, I mean, even hearing his story of how he started City Weekly with like a newsletter and back in like, wasn't it the 70s? I don't know. We could save that for his story. But,
but he's been an amazing supporter. And that's what I'm coming to realize is I didn't know I had him as a supporter until last year. He just reached out and said, hey, we're going to do this thing. And he was so gracious and kind about it. You know, he's like, I don't want to hurt the movement. You know, he was trying to be very good. He did it such a beautiful job at that convention. I was really impressed with him and his team and all the volunteers that helped there.
Was there a good turnout? A lot of people coming out to it?
I would have loved to have seen more, and that's why I'm doing all this shouting out on your show.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of reasons why people weren't there, but I think now that it's legal, there won't be as much hesitation to participate in some of these things.
A lot of people are afraid to talk about it. I know there was even a time I was afraid to bring it up because if you talk about it, then all of a sudden you're labeled as a user.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody who talks about it is a user.
Right. Well, and what is the negative connotation with being a user? I'm a user.
Yeah.
We're challenging what a user looks like now.
Well, I come from the Nancy Reagan era of say no.
I
the
did too.
80s
That
was a wonder.
Yeah.
I've actually heard they took away that from the DARE program. Is that correct? I don't know. Do you know much about that? I don't know much about it.
I think that just say no is no longer.
Yeah. Is that even a taught thing?
I don't know, but just a couple of years ago when my daughter was in middle school.
She brought some crazy
She brought home some propaganda about marijuana. And it had skulls and crossbones on it.
It was great. My kid brought them home too. I just take them as opportunities that we sit down and we chuckle, laugh, but because that responsibility should be falling onto us as parents too. We know that something is different than what is being taught in schools. What TRUCE would really like to do is start working with some community leaders on getting proper education into the schools, because what we're teaching our children are lies, and I don't want to keep propagating that. We need to put the truth out there, because when we do, then we are going to have our children not using it. We don't want our kids, if they don't have a medical need, we don't want our children using it before they're 25.
Right.
Our brains are developing. If there is a medical need, for heaven's sakes, yes, any patient, I don't care, 12 weeks old, 112, I don't care. But we do need to teach what is proper use. And if we are teaching this fear mongering that you and I survived the 80s, if we're teaching that type of tactics, we're not going to get anywhere.
It sounds like a great first step is for everyone to go to the Utah Cann.
Yeah. Well, what's scary though about this, Christine, and what I worry about is all these years of lies.
Yeah.
About if you use marijuana, all of a sudden you're going to be on the streets with needles in your arm. It's a gateway drug. And so what I'm afraid is going to happen is people are going to be like, well, I've been lied to all these years about marijuana, so let's use heroin. Let's use, and so I think we need to stop the lies. We do. We need to stop it. And I think we're doing that.
Yes. And one of the taglines that I said to all of our advocates when we were starting out was, this conversation has to start at the kitchen table. I can't take you on the hill to advocate your issue if you can't even talk to your children, your spouse, your parents. I said, those are the hardest conversations to have. Talk there first. And when you can get comfortable, at least start the conversation, then you're ready to move on. And not every person you engage with is going to have the same response to you, but it gets you a little more prepared with the arguments. It makes you challenge yourself and say, do I really feel this way? Am I educated enough on this? Do I know all the concerns that surround it? People just need to educate themselves. We can't just rely on our neighbors to make good choices for us. We can't.
I could sit here and talk with you all day, obviously, but we got to kind of wrap this up eventually, right here, Christine?
Yep.
But and I know you probably got to get out of here, but there's a couple of Salt Lake, Utah related questions I have to ask you. Otherwise, I'll get hell from our listeners. If somebody was visiting Utah, say this weekend, Salt Lake City area, what's the Christine tour? I know this is totally a different direction here, but I'm always curious what people recommend, like buildings, areas of town. I don't know.
I love downtown and Sugar House area.
Yeah.
I really love the 9th and 9th. I mean, if people were going to come into Salt Lake, I'm still learning now. I have to remind your listeners, I was bedridden and housebound for 16 years.
So you're still like discovering things.
I'm discovering Salt Lake. I'm discovering the state. I mean, it was 2014 was the first time I made it out of the state in years and years and years since I moved here. I hadn't even been to Zion's until like 2.5 years ago. So I am discovering it all for the first time too. So I get to fall in love with Salt Lake and everything that's beautiful about Utah.
That's awesome.
I love Park City. Right now I love going up there just because the air is clean.
Oh yeah.
It's a good place to breathe.
Yeah, it's just nice. It's beautiful. It's just, there's so many different places that I've been to just recently that I'm enjoying. So
What about favorite local eating spots?
I just went to a Lebanese restaurant. I think Derek Kitchen.
Oh yeah, Laziz.
Yes.
Laziz.
Oh my gosh,
It's
that
so
was divine.
good.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I'll be coming
I
back,
love those
Derek.
guys. Yeah.
That was phenomenal. I love Oasis. That's always been such a good place for me. I'm trying to think what other places are there good to eat. Oh goodness.
There's so many.
There are.
I realize that.
The little small plate place is Evie's or Eva's.
Oh, Eva's on Main Street.
Yeah. And there's a noodle place over there. Oh, see, like I'm getting hungry now.
It's
Oh
a
my
question I
gosh.
ask everybody through here. And you know what's really fun is we get listeners that they're making lists of this, right? Because
Like, wait,
they
let
want
me
to know
go down.
Christine's recommendations.
Yep.
I know we have a final question that we ask. Chrissy asks everybody that comes through here, but
Mm-hmm.
is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wished we would have? And I know we could have gone down so many different rabbit holes with cannabis and the benefits and all the awesome things
Mm-hmm.
about it, but we'll just bring you back through here. Is there anything you wanted while we're recording?
I would just challenge anybody that's listening is not to give up hope. I know it seems like politicking is an arduous affair. It just seems so daunting and like you do one step forward and 2 steps back. But that's how you win. You get knocked down and you keep getting up and keep going. Every year I was knocked down on the hill. You know, nothing got passed, but here we are. We've got some kind of cannabis legislation and we're not done yet. So my challenge is to tell people not to give up.
And I actually forgot, how can listeners get a hold of you? What's like a website,
Yes,
email?
the website is www.truceutah.org. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram. Our Facebook is the most active. We have a daily blog. We are pumping out research. We're telling you about policy. We're telling you about historical stuff. We're sharing patient stories on our Facebook. We really are trying to encourage a community there so that we can build from that. And if you message that, our admins will answer. Me or several others will
Communicate
answer
with you.
Yeah. We're trying to build the community.
And I urge all listeners, get involved. I mean,
Absolutely.
honestly, even just come to the cannabis convention.
Yes, Utah
And
Cann.
What, May 10th, 11th? I think
May 10th and 11th. It's a Friday and a Saturday. I think that's Mother's Day weekend.
Oh, perfect.
Tell Mom
Mother-
you'll be
yeah.
back. You'll be there
I'll
on
Mom, I got a
Sunday,
trick
Mom.
for you. Come on.
But yeah, bring Mom down, bring Grandma down, Auntie down, and come learn about cannabis. I promise you will be amazed. The research, the last one last year, they had a whole library, a whole just bookstore of cannabis books that you can purchase. There was lots of vendors that were willing to take time to talk to you about different things, different industries involving cannabis. So just come on down. It will be fun.
Chrissy has a final question she asks everybody that comes through here, so we're going to end it with her question here.
If you could leave our listeners with one piece of life advice or a motto that you live by, what would you say to them?
If suffering is the human condition, let compassion be the cure.
Many thanks again to Christine Stenquist for joining us on this episode of the podcast. You can find all the links to connect with her by visiting iamsaltlake.com/379.
Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9, amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org. And it is time for weekly recommendations, my favorite time of the podcast. We got some great weekly recommendations for you this week, and these are recommendations that come from inside of us, right? Like they're not
Yeah.
sponsors. They're just something that we enjoy or something that we would recommend to our friends. And I think it's turned into a fun little segment on the podcast.
It's almost like a gratitude practice, you know?
Well, a lot of times it's like, well, what should I share this week, right? Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to share that because people are going to judge me or people are going to think differently of me. But
Yeah.
my weekly recommendations, so this might have even been back in the fall time, even October, November, right? When I was doing New Year's resolutions and I was like, hey, does anybody have recommendations? Because I want to get into meditation. Well, of course, everybody recommends, apps like Calm app and Headspace.
Yeah.
Right. And I think they want like $50, right, for a membership. And I'm the type of person where it's like, well, I don't even know if I'm going to like meditation, right? I found this great podcast. It's called Meditation Minis by Chell Hamilton. I think that's how you pronounce her name. It's free, right? Right in your podcast app. However you're listening to this, go search it, go check it out. And what's great about these is they're short little 10 to 15 minute meditation sessions. I love it. And I've been getting, I get about 3 times a week right now that I'm meditating. I think it's helping. I don't know. The way I look at it is it just gives me 10 minutes to get away from the world for a little bit.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Go check it out. Meditation Minis, great little podcast, free meditation. I'm a fan.
It's also a really cute name, Meditation Minis.
Yeah.
I want to buy it. So my recommendation this week is the Brene Brown special on Netflix. It is so incredible. And to be fair, I've only made it halfway through because we watched it really late at night.
We keep falling asleep.
We keep falling asleep because we're getting old. But it was just like mind-blowingly inspiring. And I was actually had my phone open and I was taking notes the whole time. So,
you know what I love about this though, Chrissy, is I don't look at you as a big self-help type of person, right? Self-development and motivational type person.
I tend to be very leery.
And so the fact that you love this, like I think Brene Brown is excellent. And I know I'm not allowed to give I'm going to give another recommendation here. Go listen to the Brene Brown interview on WTF with Mark Maron. It's not necessarily Mark Maron's most amazing interview, but it was just a fascinating conversation because I don't know a lot about Brene Brown. And so I want to find out more about her. Sorry to interrupt your
you're
weekly
good.
recommendation there.
And this is interesting. I am one of those people that I'm more skeptical. I think there's a lot of fluff surrounding the industry, right?
There is.
But Brene Brown just cuts through the shit. She's genuine, she's authentic, and she makes everything genuinely entertaining. Like she's funny, clever, insightful. Everybody needs to just follow her.
And I would be surprised if somebody listening right now doesn't have Netflix. So just go pull it up and check it out.
You know Brene Brown. Go find her. And that's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to support our show sponsors, Five Wives Vodka, Market Source Real Estate and HostGator, and KRCL. We'll have the links for them at our website under the notes for this episode, which you can find at iamsaltlake.com.
And don't forget to get on our email list. It's really easy to do. iamsaltlake.com/email. That way you can get our weekly newsletters and everything I Am Salt Lake related.
And if you want to send us letters, packages, cookies, or candy, you can send it to P.O. Box 4412, Salt Lake City, Utah 84110.
And if you mail us stuff, we will talk about it here on the podcast, you guys.
Yeah, we'll open it in our mailbag section.
But you guys have a great week. Get out and enjoy the city. It's a beautiful time of the year here. Support local, and we're going to see you on that next episode.
And good night, Grammy.